So let's take a look at setting up our scene. Before we get too long, I like to always kind of save an iteration of my scene. So I'm going to do a save as, just a Command Shift S, and let's just call this version 2. Um, Normally every morning I kind of sit down, if I'm at work, I'll save a new iteration, just to kind of keep, we have all these items here. In case we want to start changing them, I'm going to start deleting these groups and kind of placing these all in their own item. Into the single mesh layer and scaling everybody. But just so we have something we can always come back to, I like to save a new iteration. So let's keep this as Whiskey Lasso 2. And let's kind of focus mainly on this class from here on out. So first thing I know is the scale is way off. And also before we get too long, I'm going to kind of put these, well, let's just work with this one now. But let's scale everybody into place. So I'm going to take these polygons that are on the whiskey itself, double click them, cut them, and jump to the glass layer and paste those in. So now we have both sort of mesh groups all inside of one layer itself. So now that we have that, I'm going to come into this other whiskey layer and delete it, just to start keeping things kind of nice and clean and organized. But now it's time to get this guy into its proper scale. Now, clearly we could have done that early on when modeling, but I'm normally kind of just blazing through when I'm doing concept art or things like that, and I don't really always necessarily worry about scale until it's time to render, it's time to really think about it. So now that we want to build our scene, let's get this into a nice or proper dimensions. There's one way you can do it, is you come to the View, Dimensions tool, and let's see, select our polygons. That's going to show as well. This guy right now is 7.6 meters high, so clearly he's way too big. So as I start scaling this down, if you read this here, still 1 meter high. So you can kind of leave the dimensions tool on and scale until you know it's more or less accurate. Or you can use, I'm going to hit escape because that's actually a tool, so I want to drop that tool. Let's turn our ice cube off real quick and just look at the cup. Shift A to fit the selection into our viewport is under the snapping and precisions menu. Down here at the bottom is absolute scaling. So here, I want to just tell it to be kind of a or down here the explicit scale. I'm going to link these channels. So I know more or less it's about 4 inches, whatever. So if I hit this little icon here, it's actually going to link all these fields, so it's going to keep the proper ratio that I have set up between these. So if I just do 4 inches, enter, and now hit explicit scale, it's going to scale that down to, well, 4 inches. So that's a nice way of running, again, the snaps and precision and getting these exactly the size we want them. So right now he's floating kind of in midair. This is our ground plane down here at the bottom. So I want to run this center selected tool. Once again, if no polygons on our item type or our selected item are selected, then all of them are selected. So I'm going to run center selected all and get him right down here in the middle of our scene. And now come up and just move it basically so he's sitting on the ground plane itself. There we go. So now we got our cup scaled and in the middle of the scene. And now let's go to our ice cube itself. So I'm going to turn his layer back on, and let's do the same thing. Snaps and precision, absolute scaling, and I'm guessing maybe 1 inch for this guy. We'll see how that looks. Maybe a little bit, that might be a little too big. So once again, let's just kind of link these channels, and in Y being the height, let's type in 1 inch, enter, and run the explicit scale. Close this palette, and there we go. Now we have a 1 inch cube and a 4 inch cup. I've kind of put this into play. You can see, well, yeah, he's more or less kind of the right scale. So I thought it'd be one fun thing to kind of show you. Let's center this guy again. So center all. Now we got that cube in there. I thought a fun trick to place these ice cubes into the cup would actually be using dynamics, which is running basically a physics engine to place this into this cup, rather than, we obviously can move it, rotate it, make it so it's kind of lined up on the bottom there. But let's just have a little fun and take a look at Modo's bullet dynamic engine. So quickly save my scene and jump over to the animation tab, or the setup tab. I'm sorry about that. So the first thing I want to do is actually create a duplicate of this cup. So we don't want to use the liquid itself. And also when we're doing the calculations, it's going to be doing it on the unsubdivided one. So if I hit tab, this is what's going to run the calculation on. So we actually have to create a sort of a proxy mesh that's actually subdivided itself, not just by hitting tab. So I'm going to copy these polygons by doing just a normal, edit copy, Command C. Let's make a new mesh layer, pull it out of that group, paste it in, turn off the other cup itself. So it has no liquid. We don't want the ice cubes to fall and hit the liquid. And now I'm just going to hit D one time on this mesh. So D is actually going to subdivide, add those geometry spans. Again, not at render time or not on that smooth tab way, just physically add those in there themselves. So what we want to do now is on the dynamics menu is in item mode, select the cup. So we want this item to be an passive rigid body dynamic sim. So we click that. So basically anything we drop in it or on it is going to get caught inside that cup. If it was a ground plane, you'd want it to be a passive rigid, and the ice cube, which we will make it, an active rigid, will fall and get stuck on that ground. So we'll leave him as a passive rigid. Now we'll come to the ice cube itself, make him an active rigid body. So now when we run the sim, the active rigid body is actually going to have a little bit of gravity force, and he's going to fall and get stuck inside this cup. First I'm going to jump to the dynamics tab on this guy and just put my margin down to 1 millimeter. Oh, not 11 millimeters. 1. And I'll just calculate a little bit cleaner. So let's just, again, in item mode, pick him up, move him into the cup. And it's a little hard to see in there, so let's change our shading, viewport shading to wireframe. And let's just kind of get this guy placed close to more or less kind of where we want it. But when we run the dynamics, it's actually going to rotate and fall and get kind of a lot of sort of random characteristics all by itself. And one thing to note is you don't want it to be, make sure it's not actually colliding inside that mesh at all, or like through the cup. Make sure he's got a little bit of a boundary between him and the edge of the cup. So let's take the ice cube, and what I'm going to do over in the item list is right click on it and come down the menu about halfway and choose duplicate. So now I duplicated the item, but the nice thing about doing it in the item list and I'm duplicating it is it still has that dynamics active rigid body that we already set earlier. So I don't have to re-add the sim to it, or the sim, but the rigid type. It's already set in there because we duplicated the original one. So let's move it over. Let's just give it a little bit of random rotation characteristics. So when it falls, it's not trying to match the other cubes too much. Move it over. Again, just kind of make sure it's not breaking through the glass at all. Right click on this one, come down to duplicate, move that one over. Let's rotate him again. Probably pull him down a touch and back. Let's take a look. Looks good. None of them are colliding. And let's do that one more time. Let's get 4 cubes in here. Right click, duplicate. Pull him up and over. Get into the scene, or into the cup, I'm sorry. We don't want them touching any of them, so it'll kind of break the sim when you run it if these are self-penetrating between or with the other meshes. So make sure there's a little bit of gap between everyone. Quick rotation on him. I'm going to save my scene. And now these three icons down here are what's actually going to run our player sim, and this one on the end is going to cache it when we want to get down to actually freezing these meshes. So let's just see what we get by hitting the first play button, and let's watch these guys with gravity fall into place. And look at them. They're just going to magically float around, bouncing our scene. And we could have hand placed all these. We could have done a lot more. But we're getting a pretty nice, tight little sim. And some pretty cool random characteristics right from the gate without even having to model these ice cubes into place. So I'm going to hit stop. And I kind of liked how that ended up, but this last one cube, he didn't seem to be in a great little location. So I'm going to move him over just a touch, move it back up, make sure he's not penetrating. Again, these are kind of random. We're letting gravity or simulations kind of place these, so we don't know exactly where he's going to line up. But the nice thing is we're just going to run this, see what it gets us. Then we can hand place and model these kind of to our camera or to our shot later on. But this is just giving us a nice little start to randomly place these ice cubes in the scene. There we go. I kind of like how that one fell a little bit better. So I'm going to hit stop now. And as you can see, when I hit stop, they bounce back into place. So what we need to do is actually cache it, which is going to save its dynamics transformations into a file, or into the file. So this is this third icon down here on the right. If I click that, this is now going to actually compute the simulation. So start time is what frame you want to start on. We'll start on 0. And it seemed like around frame 60, or let's just say 75, they're already in the place in the bottom of the cup. So I hit OK. And now we're going to let Modo physically calculate that for us. Then once we do that, we'll have those into place, and we can copy and paste those polygons into its own mesh layer. So you can tell it's going pretty quickly. And also once we have this, then we can actually scrub through the timeline and pick a frame that we like, things like that. Before we were just kind of quickly viewing the sim, but now we actually have it cached. So as I scrub through the timeline, this bottom bar down here is our actual time. So these go by frames. So there's 24 frames a second for film. And we can just come into place where we kind of like them. And there we go. I like where these polygons are at now. You can tell just because I was actually using the item, what's called, if you look at the dynamics thing, we're using the hull, basically the cage, the non-subdied cage. So there's a little bit of a gap there. If I change this display mode to bounding box real quick, that's actually what it's using as a calculations. It's a little bit quicker, so it's using the outer sort of shell, not just the complete polygons. That's why we have a little bit of a gap here, but that's much easier fix in modeling than it would have been to hand place all these. So once we like that sim, which I do, I'm going to hold shift in item mode, select all 4 of these ice cubes, come to polygon mode, copy those, and again, I'm going to just put all these original cubes in a group. So we have them. We can always come back to those and run the sim again if you want to later on. So again, the shortcut to do that would be Control G. We made a group for those guys. We'll call these ice cubes. I'm going to put the solver in there as well, just because we'll keep our item list nice and clean. And also that other cup that we kind of made as a proxy mesh, I'll drop that in there. So kind of all our simmed items for those ice cubes are in this group. I'll turn it off and come up to our item list and make another new mesh layer. And since we copied those meshes, or we copied all those polygons, let's hit paste. And now we can see our ice cubes kind of in a place, all in one mesh. Now simulation is no longer on those. Those are just the raw polygons we placed. So let's double click this guy. And again, let's just kind of move him just so he's almost touching these other guys here. Now if we turn our cut back on and hit tab, tab on the glass itself, and change our shading method back to something solid or shaded. We see that one ice cube's kind of poking through, and just due to the nature of the glass, because it's kind of sideways, we got him kind of popping through the glass, which you can kind of see some of these ones doing the same thing. So yours is definitely not going to look the same as mine based on how you simmed it or cached it. But this gives us a nice kind of starting point. And obviously, if you want, come in here and kind of pick the polygons from those ice cubes and put them in, rotate it towards the camera, really place it. But starting off with that sim gives us a really nice starting point for getting that random variation on these ice cubes. Let's just quickly name these guys. Ice cubes. Ice is cubes. Ice cubes. And there we go. So now we have our glass in one mesh, our ice cubes in the other. And if we wanted to, we could just take all those polygons, cut them, paste them into the glass mesh, and have everything in one editable mesh. But I'll leave it as two meshes for now. In the next chapter, let's take a look at setting up materials and our camera.